No tornado has ever exceeded the damage done by the 1925 tri-state tornado. In the span of several hours, over 600 people died and over 2,000 were injured. This is the story of the deadliest tornado in U.S. history. Although some people who lived in the Midwestern United States knew that tornadoes existed, the word itself was off limits for weather forecasters until the 1950s. According to the National Weather Service, the use of the word tornado in forecasts was at times strongly discouraged and at other times forbidden because of a fear that mentioning tornadoes might cause panic. Smithsonian Magazine writes that in the 1880s, some researchers had put together a list of criteria for, quote, conditions that could lead to a tornado, but the government didn't want to cause a panic based on less than reliable predictions, so instead, the word itself was banned. Forecasters were forced to come up with euphemisms like, quote, severe local storms. Meanwhile, as the Weather Bureau went on to create prediction and warning systems for fires, floods, and hurricanes, the Weather Bureau station's regulations of 1905 stated that, quote, forecasts of tornadoes are prohibited. In 1915 and 1934, the Weather Bureau upheld the ban. But despite the Weather Bureau's reluctance to even say the word, tornadoes were known to be an occurrence amongst those who lived in the Midwest. According to Mental Floss, on August 28, 1884, the first photograph of a tornado was captured in what is now South Dakota. Although tornadoes have been known to happen around the world, the continental United States experiences the majority of tornadoes. Roughly 40% of the eastern continental United States can be considered a tornado region. According to National Geographic, tornadoes form when warm, humid air collides with cold, dry air. As the jet stream from the Gulf of Mexico travels up, it hits the cold, dry air coming from the north. As the warm air pushes the cold air down, thunderstorms are created, and as the warm air rises, it can cause an updraft which will, quote, begin to rotate if winds vary sharply in speed or direction. The spinning updraft is known as a mesocyclone, and as it draws in more and more warm air, its speed increases. Water droplets from the air create the funnel cloud, and once that funnel cloud hits the ground, it's a tornado. On average, a tornado can last as long as a few seconds or a few hours. Tornadoes are ranked with a Fujita scale from F0 to F5 based on their intensity. This is done by analyzing the damage the twister has done and then matching that to the wind speeds estimated to produce comparable damage. On March 18, 1925, the weather forecast had been showers and cooling temperatures. However, this forecast wasn't out of the ordinary, and no one seemed to suspect what was coming.
It's coming! It's headed right for us!
Even though no one was looking at tornado forecasts in particular, the Weather Bureau had noticed a low-pressure system that had traveled from Canada, quote, all the way to the Oklahoma-Texas border before curving back towards southern Missouri. Meanwhile, a warm front from the Gulf of Mexico was moving north, and the moist, warm air began to mix with the northern air. Temperatures rose steadily that day and even ended up reaching 70 degrees Fahrenheit around Cairo, Illinois by 4 p.m. This mixture created what is known as a lifting mechanism, and before long, the storm began to spiral. Gray skies that had been sprinkling rain over southeastern Missouri suddenly turned black. In Gorham, Illinois, the storm announced its approach by throwing hail the size of golf balls. Orange Bean, Indiana writes that people felt ill at ease as the cloud darkened, expecting a big storm with rain and flooding. No one expected the massive twister. And since the word tornado had been banned by the Weather Bureau, some people in the region didn't even know what a tornado was. The tri-state tornado touched down near Ellington, Missouri. Traveling at 73 miles an hour, the tornado reached Annapolis, Missouri around 1:30 p.m. It left 90% of the town destroyed in its wake. As the tornado crossed the Mississippi, it passed through Gorham, Illinois, and left half of its population of 500 injured. U.S. Tornadoes writes, it came and left so quickly that nobody knew what had really happened. In DeSoto, Illinois, trees were snapped off at knee height and stumps then ripped out of the ground. No structure was left standing in the tornado's path. The tornado passed through several mining towns. When the miners came up to the surface in West Frankfort, they encountered devastation. Continuing north, the tornado roared through Princeton, Indiana, until it finally dissipated near Petersburg, Indiana. The length that the tornado traveled was around 220 miles, the longest tornado track ever recorded, and it lasted a total of 3.5 hours. However, the Electronic Journal of Severe Storms Meteorology states that based on the tornado's development around noon, it's possible that the tornado lasted as long as 7 hours. Throughout its entire path, the tornado raced across the countryside at more than 55 miles per hour, with wind speeds reaching an astonishing 300 miles per hour. Many have suggested that had tornado classifications existed at the time, the tornado would certainly have registered as an F5. And one day, 695 people lost their lives to a single tornado, and over 2,000 people were injured. Some were killed by flying debris, others were trapped and killed under collapsing buildings. And even as anesthetics ran out, many had to undergo surgery to have their limbs amputated. In many of the towns, residents only had seconds to react. Some people were thrown as far as a quarter mile by the tornado that was itself a mile wide. As the tornado passed through rail yards, boxcars and train tracks were torn from the ground. One person was reportedly cut in half as a big metal bell was ripped from the roof. Stormstalker writes that the mining industry in many of the towns was also devastated because much of the mining machinery was ripped up and mangled beyond repair. And although some of the mines continued to operate at a limited capacity for another 20 years, things were never the way they'd been before the tri-state tornado. To this day, the damage by a single tornado has been unparalleled. Thousands of people were suddenly rendered unhoused, a situation that was only worsened by the Great Depression 4 years later. Murfreesboro, Illinois was hit so badly that some referred to the 1925 tri-state tornado as the Murfreesboro tornado. Over 240 people died in the town, and this was when the tornado still had another 2 hours to travel. The winds of the tri-state tornado were so strong that houses were literally torn from their foundations and flown in different directions. A first-hand account in Popular Mechanics said, the house of Wallace Aiken reportedly began to levitate, and at the same time, the piano shot across the room, gouging the floor and carpet. The walls began to crack as the roof ripped free and disappeared, joining the swirling mass of debris. But the walls and the floor held as we and the house took flight. The house landed on top of the family's garage, which they realized had also flown and had landed on top of another house altogether. Other buildings, like the schoolhouse and the unincorporated community of Ridge, were thrown several yards into a hillside. Thankfully, no one was killed, but dozens were seriously injured. Some homes were completely leveled, while others, quote, virtually exploded in a cloud of shattered timbers and roofing. According to the Building Safety Journal, the tornado destroyed approximately 15,000 homes and caused $17 million in property damage, $1.4 billion adjusted for today. Some towns didn't recover until World War II, when the abandoned lots left behind were finally rebuilt. Some have speculated that the tri-state tornado was in fact a family of tornadoes, but given its continuous path, this hypothesis is unlikely. But as the National Weather Service asks, could it be that the 1925 tornado was a rare event, occurring only once in several hundred years? Did it actually result from a cyclical supercell, or could it be that we lack enough information to come to a definitive conclusion at this time? According to Electronic Journal of Severe Storms Meteorology, indeed, the somewhat mundane character of the synoptic situation leads one to wonder why very long-track tornadoes do not occur more frequently. It's also notable that compared to other tornadoes, which often have an unpredictable path, the tri-state tornado maintained a straight path for almost 200 miles. One thing that's for certain is that the lack of prediction or emergency warning services had a devastating effect. It's understandable that the Weather Bureau was reluctant to release tornado warnings since they were considered unpredictable. However, if local meteorologists and forecasters had been allowed to study tornadoes, there could have been some kind of advance warning. The tri-state tornado was followed by heavy rainfall, which led to flooding in many areas. The Wabash River near Griffin, Indiana flooded and cut the town off from the rest of the state. Despite it being incredibly difficult to get aid to the city, the American Red Cross arrived to set up tents for the residents. Martial law was even declared in Griffin, and soldiers from the Indiana National Guard were brought in. Popular Mechanics writes that Murfreesboro, Illinois suffered fires as the tornado trailed off, and because the water supply was broken, it was impossible to put the fires out. As a result, some who survived the collapsing buildings ended up succumbing to flames. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch reported, "Scenes of suffering and horror marked the storm and fire. Throughout the night, relief workers and ambulances endeavored to make their way through the streets strewn with wreckage, fallen telegraph poles and wires, and burning embers. The only light afforded was that of the burning area. People looked for survivors for days, but in areas of flooding and fires, the chances of survival were low. But some people persisted in moving the rubble looking for anyone who might remain. Some found their efforts rewarded, while others realized after several days that they were searching in vain." The one good thing that came out of the tri-state tornado was the realization that there should be a push in tornado awareness. The Weather Bureau wouldn't agree for almost another 25 years and continued to ban the use of the word tornado, but this didn't stop local communities from figuring out a forecasting system themselves. Popular Mechanics writes that after 1925, groups of tornado watchers were mentioned in local newspapers. These storm spotter programs were effective in, quote, contributing to a steady decline in the number of tornado deaths in subsequent years. In fact, according to Weather and Forecasting, the first hint of a downward trend in fatalities can be found almost directly after the 1925 tri-state tornado. In the 21st century, roughly 50 people are killed by tornadoes each year. 100 years ago, that number was almost tenfold. In the first half of the 20th century, all efforts were community-based. Despite the fact that between 1920 and 1939, over 4,000 people died as a result of tornadoes in the United States, the Weather Bureau did, quote, nothing to try to reduce the loss of life from these natural disasters. Systematic tornado prediction programs wouldn't be introduced for another 25 years. It wouldn't be until World War II, when the United States Army decided that they needed to protect their military installations, that tornado forecasting became a public service. On March 20th, 1948, a tornado ripped through the Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma. Afterwards, Captain Robert Miller and Major Ernest Fawbush were asked by General Fred Borum to work on tornado predictions so that such an incident wouldn't happen again. 5 days later, the two meteorologists informed General Borum that the weather conditions on March 25th seemed suspiciously like those on March 20th. According to Popular Mechanics, they issued a tornado warning despite the infinitesimal possibility of a second tornado striking the same area within 20 years or more, let alone in 5 days. And they were right. Another tornado ripped through Tinker Air Force Base, but this time the general grounded all planes and cleared all air traffic. Despite seeing the benefits of tornado predictions, it was only applied to Air Force sites on the continental United States by 1951. It wouldn't be until March 17, 1952, that the Weather Bureau put on their first public tornado bulletin, which was televised by weatherman Harry Vokerman, forecasting tornadoes in Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Texas. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.